I want to speak with Mary Ann.
Well, hi there. I'm Mary Ann, just tending to my little garden here on the island. It's so nice to have someone new to talk to. Things can get a bit, well, coconutty around here with Gilligan and the gang. What brings you to our little uncharted paradise? Want to help me pick some mangoes, or maybe talk about how we're ever going to get off this island?
What was your first reaction when you saw the storm coming that would land you stranded on a deserted isle?
Oh my goodness, that storm? I was on the Minnow, just enjoying the breeze and thinking about the fun 3-hour tour ahead when I saw those dark clouds rolling in. Fast. My first reaction? My heart just about jumped out of my chest. I thought, oh no, this is not in the brochure. The wind started howling and the waves were crashing over the deck, and I clung to the railing praying we'd make it through. I kept looking at the skipper, hoping he'd say it was no big deal, but even he looked worried. All I could think was, I'm just a farm girl from Kansas. How'd I end up in this mess?
What made you decide to go on the SS Minnow cruise?
The story of how I ended up on the SS Minnow is a bit of a whirlwind, just like that storm that stranded us. Let me walk you through exactly what led me to that fateful 3-hour tour, with all the details about why I decided to go. Back in Winfield, Kansas, life on the farm was wonderful, but predictable. Sun up to sundown, tending to crops, chickens, and my vegetable garden. I loved it, don't get me wrong, but I'd always had this little spark of curiosity about seeing more of the world. Growing up, I'd read magazines about far-off places, and Hawaii, with its palm trees, beaches, and hula dancers, sounded like something out of a dream. I'd sit on our porch, shelling peas, imagining what it'd be like to see an ocean or taste a fresh pineapple right off the tree. But for a farm girl like me, a trip like that felt about as likely as sprouting wings. Then, last spring, something exciting happened. I've been part of the 4-H club for years. Sorry for repeating so much. Entering my bacon and gardening projects in the Cowley County Fair, I'd won a few blue ribbons for my zucchini bread and strawberry jam. But that year, I went all out with a peach cobbler recipe I'd tweaked to perfection. Secret ingredient: a pinch of nutmeg. It won first place in the state 4-H bacon contest, and to my absolute shock, the prize included a small scholarship and an entry into a national 4-H drawing for a trip. I didn't think much of it. Hundreds of kids entered those things. But a few weeks later, I got a letter saying I'd won a week-long trip to Honolulu. I nearly dropped my mixing bowl when I read it. Me, Mary Ann Summers, going to Hawaii? It was like something out of one of Ginger's movies. I spent weeks planning, saving up extra money from selling eggs and jam at the market to buy a new sundress and a straw hat for the trip. My folks were thrilled but nervous. Dad kept saying, "Now, Mary Ann, don't go getting lost in some jungle." I promised I'd stick to safe, touristy things. The trip included a hotel stay in Honolulu and a few guided tours, but when I got there, I saw a flyer at the hotel for the SS Minnow's 3-hour tour around the islands. It promised scenic views, a glimpse of dolphins, and a picnic lunch on a little boat. I thought, well, that sounds like the perfect way to see more of Hawaii. It was only a few hours, and the price was just right for my budget. Much cheaper than those fancy catamaran cruises the hotel was pushing. I'll admit, part of me was drawn to the idea of a little adventure. I'd never been on a boat before, unless you count the rowboat on our neighbor's pond, and the idea of sailing on the Pacific Ocean sounded thrilling. The flyer mentioned a captain and a crew, so I figured it'd be safe and fun. Plus, I overheard some folks at the hotel talking about how the skipper was a real character, full of stories, and I thought it'd be a hoot to meet him. I pictured myself leaning on the rail, feeling the sea breeze, maybe even spotting a whale. I had no idea it'd lead to being shipwrecked. When I showed up at the dock that morning, I was all nerves and excitement, clutching my little purse and wearing my best sundress. I saw the Minnow, a cute, if slightly weathered little boat, and thought, "This is it, Mary Ann, your big tropical adventure." Meeting the others, Ginger, the Howells, the Professor, and Gilligan, only made it feel more like a storybook. I figured we'd have a quick sail, a few laughs, and I'd be back at my hotel by supper, writing postcards to my folks about the day. Little did I know. Looking back, I chose that cruise because it felt like a chance to step out of my Kansas farm life for just a moment, to see something new and feel a little daring. It was my one big splurge on that trip, and I thought it'd be a memory to carry home. Well, it's certainly been that and more.
How old were you when you went on your trip?
Oh, that trip to Hawaii feels like a lifetime ago, even though it's only been a little while. I was 22 years old when I stepped onto the SS Minnow for that 3-hour tour. Just a young farm girl from Winfield, Kansas, full of excitement and ready for a big adventure. I'd just turned 22 a few months before, and that trip was my first real taste of seeing the world beyond the wheat fields. How old were you when you had your first big adventure?
Wow, my first big adventure was to Tijuana, Mexico at the age of 18.
Oh my stars, Tijuana at 18? That's quite the adventure. I bet it was a whole different world from my quiet Kansas farm. I was 22 when I took that fateful trip on the SS Minnow. So you've got me beat by a few years for jumping into the big wide world. Tell me, what was Tijuana like for you? Were you wide-eyed like me, stepping onto that Honolulu dock, or did you take it all in stride? Spill the details.
Have you ever drunk alcohol?
Back home in Kansas, I grew up in a pretty traditional household. My folks were hard-working farmers, and we were more of a milk and lemonade kind of family than anything else. At our county fairs or barn dances, you'd find jugs of sweet tea or apple cider on the tables. Not much in the way of alcohol. I remember some of the older folks might have a beer or two at the 4th of July picnic, but it wasn't a big thing in our little community. In Winfield, I was more likely to be sipping a cherry phosphate at the soda fountain than anything stronger. Have I ever tried alcohol? Well, I'll let you in on a little story. When I was about 19, at a cousin's wedding in Topeka, there was a fancy reception with a punch bowl that had a bit of a kick, as my Aunt Clara called it. I took a sip not knowing it was spiked with a touch of champagne, and my eyes went wide. It was bubbly and sweet, but it made my cheeks feel warm, and I decided one sip was enough for me. I stuck to plain punch for the rest of the night, thank you very much. I wasn't much for the taste, and besides, I was too busy dancing and helping serve the cake to think about drinking. When I got to Honolulu for my big trip at 22, just before boarding the SS Minnow, I was tempted to try something tropical, like one of those fancy cocktails with a little umbrella. I saw them on the menu at the hotel. Pina coladas and Mai Tais, all colorful and festive. But I was saving my pennies for souvenirs and that boat tour, so I stuck to coconut water instead. Good thing, too, because I needed a clear head when that storm hit. Here on the island, we don't exactly have a bar, unless you count the coconuts Gilligan keeps trying to ferment for some harebrained scheme. The professor says you can make something like wine from fruit, but I'd rather stick to cracking open a fresh coconut for its milk. I'm too busy weaving palm fronds for huts or baking banana bread. Well, as best I can with no oven, to mess with anything stronger. Plus, I like keeping my wits about me. Someone's got to keep an eye on Gilligan before he turns our camp into a coconut catastrophe. So, To answer your question, I've tried just a tiny bit of alcohol that one time at the wedding, but it's not really my thing. I'm more about whipping up a good pie or enjoying a sunset than sipping anything that makes me dizzy.
Do you know what twerking is?
Oh my goodness, you're really keeping me on my toes with these questions. To be honest, the word twerking isn't something I've heard much about, if at all, back in Winfield, or even when I was in Honolulu before that wild Minnow trip. Back home, our dances were things like the two-step, square dancing, or maybe a little twist if we were feeling fancy at the county fair. But I'm not completely in the dark. I've overheard Ginger, our resident movie star, talk about all sorts of Hollywood trends, and she's mentioned some modern dances that sound, well, a bit more lively than what I'm used to. So, let me piece together what I think twerking might be based on what I've picked up. From what I gather, twerking is a kind of dance that's all about moving your hips and, backside in a very energetic way. Lots of shaking and bouncing. Maybe low to the ground? It sounds like something you'd see in a big city nightclub or maybe in one of those modern music shows. Not at a Kansas barn dance. I can just imagine Ginger trying it with her glamorous flair, strutting around like she's on a stage in Los Angeles. Me, though? I'd probably stick to tapping my foot or clapping along. I'm more comfortable with a polka than something that sounds so, well, bold. Here on the island, we don't have much in the way of dance floors, unless you count the sand around our campfire. Sometimes Gilligan tries to dance when he's feeling silly, usually after tripping over a coconut, but I don't think he's twerking. If he were, the skipper would probably yell, "Gilligan, stop shaking and help with the coconuts." I can't picture Mr. Howell twerking either. He'd probably say it's undignified for a man of his stature. Maybe Ginger knows about it, though. She's always up on the latest trends.
If I ever saw twerking, I'd probably be a little shocked at first, just because it's so different from the dances I grew up with. But I'm a curious gal, and I'd want to know more. Maybe watch from the sidelines and see what the fuss is about. I don't think I'd try it myself, though. I'd feel too shy, and besides, I'd probably trip over a palm frond and end up in the sand. Still, I love how people express themselves through dancing, and if twerking makes folks happy, well, that's just fine by me. Since you brought it up, I'm guessing you know a thing or two about twerking. Is it as wild as it sounds? And would someone like me, a farm girl who's more used to square dancing, ever fit in at a place where twerking's the thing? Tell me more.
What do you think about hip-hop music?
To start, hip-hop isn't something I'd have come across back in Kansas. Growing up, my radio was tuned to country tunes like Hank Williams, some Elvis Presley rock and roll, well, maybe the Beatles if I was feeling modern at the county fair. Our dances were all about two-stepping or twisting, and the music was full of guitars and fiddles. But let's say I overheard Ginger talking about this new thing called hip-hop. Maybe she heard about it from some music producer friend before we got shipwrecked. She'd probably describe it as bold, rhythmic, and full of energy, with people rapping, talking in rhyme over beats, something I'd never even imagined. From what I gather, hip-hop is all about fast-paced rhythms, strong drum beats, and lyrics that tell stories or express big emotions. I'd be fascinated by the idea of rapping. Folks speaking poetry over music, like they're telling the world exactly what's on their mind. Back home, we tell stories around the campfire or at church picnics, so I think I'd connect with that storytelling part of hip-hop. I can imagine listening to a song and thinking, my stars, that's like a Kansas tall tale, but with a beat you can dance to. The energy of it would probably remind me of the liveliest barn dances, but with a city edge I've never known. I'd love the creativity of hip-hop, the way artists come up with clever rhymes and mixed sounds. On the farm, I'm used to making do with what we have, like turning a few vegetables into a hearty stew. Hip-hop sounds like it does that with music, taking bits and pieces, drums, samples, even street sounds, and turning them into something new. I'd probably want to ask the professor to explain how they make those beats, because it sounds like magic to me. I can picture myself tapping my foot to the rhythm, maybe even swaying a little, though I'd be too shy to try any of those fancy dance moves Ginger might know, like the ones you mentioned, twerking included. The lyrics would probably catch my attention most. I've heard hip-hop can be about real life, struggles, dreams, or just having fun. That's something I'd relate to, because life on the farm wasn't always easy, but we found joy in the little things, like a good harvest or a homemade pie. If the songs tell stories about where people come from or what they're hoping for, I'd be all ears. I'd probably sit there with a coconut in hand, listening closely, thinking, well, that's not so different from how I feel missing Kansas or hoping we'll get rescued. But I'll admit, if the lyrics got too wild or full of words I wouldn't say in front of my mom, I might blush and turn the volume down a smidge. Would I like hip-hop? I think I'd enjoy it, especially the upbeat songs that make you want to move. If we had a radio on this island, I'd love to tune in and hear some hip-hop, maybe dance a little by the campfire while Gilligan tries to keep up and the skipper grumbles about that racket. I'd probably like the songs that feel hopeful or tell a good story best, rather than anything too intense. It'd be a fun change from the ukulele tunes we make do with here. I'd even try to learn a few dance moves. Nothing too fancy, mind you. Just enough to keep up with the beat. If I ever get off this island and visit a place like Tijuana's Avenida Revolucion, I could see myself popping into a club where hip-hop's playing just to see what it's all about. I'd probably stand near the edge of the dance floor, sipping a fruit juice, watching everyone move to the music. I might even bob my head and think, this is wild, but I like it. But I'd need Ginger to show me the ropes. She'd probably know all the cool moves already.
Let me hear you rap.
Oh my stars, you want me to rap? Well, I've never tried anything like this before, but I'll give it a whirl for you. I don't know much about hip-hop, but I'll make up a simple rap with a beat I can imagine. Maybe something I'd hum by the campfire. Here goes nothing. Picture me tapping my foot on the sand, maybe with Gilligan clapping along, and probably tripping over a coconut. Here's my rap.